All right, good morning. All right, good morning. Good to see everybody. All right, good to see everybody this morning. We're going to be in Joshua chapters 3 through 5 today. It's kind of a bit of a recap on where we were. It seems like we've been this way for a long time if we've been making our way through the first 5 books, that Israel is there at the border, ready to go. And that's where we find ourselves again today. So I just want us to take a look at some things that we can find in these 3 chapters that are, I hope, are pretty good things for us. Let's just start with the first 5 verses of chapter 3. Joshua rose early in the morning. They set out from Shittim, and they came to the Jordan, he and all the people of Israel, and they lodged there before they passed over. At the end of 3 days, the officers went through the camp and commanded the people, as soon as you see the ark carried by the Levitical priest, you will set out from your place and follow it. Yet there will be a distance between you and it, about 2,000 cubits in length. Do not come near it, in order that you may know the way that you will go, for you have not passed this way before. And Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. All right. I think we mentioned this a little bit last week. We're going to see it again here, where we've waited 3 days for them to get ready. If you go all the way back to Exodus 19, I think it's verses 9 through 11, where God shows up on Mount Sinai and talks to Moses. He says, have the people get ready. Right? Today, tomorrow, and the 3rd day I'm coming. Right? So this is kind of one of those things. They need to be prepared for when God moves. Right? The second thing that I found interesting about this is that, and I don't know how you've all pictured this as we picture the crossing of the Jordan, but you're to keep your distance from the ark. About a half a mile. Right? It's somewhere in that neighborhood. About half a mile, a little bit over. And so I kind of wondered about that. The first thing is, he says, okay, number one is, you don't know where you're going. Right? So this is to make sure that God's going to be leading. We talked about that a few weeks ago when we talked about the Spirit of God living in us. Right? That He knows the direction, so we need to let Him lead. Okay? But there's another thing about this that I want us to notice, is that they have to keep their distance, again, about a half a mile away from the ark. I heard this some time back, and I remember hearing it, and I'm thinking that it sounded strange. But the more I think about it, and the more we look at other places here around Joshua and before we get to Joshua, I think it makes some sense. If you go, we just kind of tell the story of Isaiah 6. You remember the story of Isaiah 6. This is where Isaiah sees God. It says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord, holy, lifted up, right? The train of his robe fills the temple. And he says all of these things that he sees. And he says, around him are these seraphim, and each have 6 wings. With 2 they cover their face, with 2 they cover their feet, and with 2 they fly. You see these angelic beings who are in the very presence of God. When they are in the very presence of God, they cover their face and they cover the rest of their body. And his point was, because God is a dangerous God. And I thought that sounds odd to me. That the God who wants to come and live among Israel is a dangerous God. But then I think back, before we get to Jordan, while they're still at Sinai, how God arranges the camp of the Israelites. That He is going to be in the middle, but they keep their distance. Except for the Levites. The Levites are closest, but they guard that distance, so that no one that's not supposed to be there comes there because they'll die. We see God's absolute holiness and God's absolute power. And if they come too close, right? If the unholy comes in contact with the holy, judgment happens. There's a story on down in Israel's history a little ways. And it's one that I admit of having some trouble with. A guy by the name of Uzzah. As they're carrying the Ark of the Covenant, right? And they're not supposed to carry it on a cart, but they do. And the ox has a misstep, and the ark begins to move, and Uzzah reaches up just to steady it, and he dies like that. Because when the unholy comes in contact with the holy, judgment happens. God is telling, through Joshua, telling the Israelites, you can't get too close here. Because God loves Israel. And God doesn't want to destroy Israel. Keep your distance. Right? I think it's the writer of Hebrews that talks about this in some parts. Just a passing phrase that he uses, that our God is a consuming fire. Right? And I don't know how that hits us. But it's kind of an amazing thing to me. That God has walked with Israel, has grabbed them and led them out of Egypt, and has walked with them for these 40 years, and still tells them, you can't get too close. You can't get too close because you will die. I think, to me, that's one of the many amazing things about the incarnation. That God comes here. That God makes a way for us to come in contact with Him where we won't die. If you go all the way back to Exodus chapter 3, we find the burning bush. And there's a lot to be said about the burning bush, but if you'll notice, the burning bush is a bush that's on fire yet not consumed. That God is in the midst of this bush, yet the bush is not destroyed. And as you walk on through Exodus and you walk on through till they get to Canaan, it's the same kind of thing, that God is going to be in the middle of Israel, but He's come up with a way where He can live with Israel without killing them. Right? Where He can live among them without doing damage to them. And when we look at the holiness and the power and the might of God, the fact that He wants to be with us and has made a way to do that is just amazing. Let's keep moving. Joshua said to the priests, take up the Ark of the Covenant, pass before the people. So they took up the Ark of the Covenant, went before the people. The Lord said to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. As for you, command the priests to bear the Ark of the Covenant. When you come to the brink of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan. Joshua said to the people of Israel, come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, here is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that He will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Behold, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of all the earth is passing over before you into the Jordan. Now therefore take 12 men from the tribes of Israel, from each tribe a man. And when the soles of the feet of the priests bearing the Ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the water of the Jordan will be cut off from flowing, and the water coming down from above shall stand in one heap. So the people set out from their tents to pass over the Jordan with the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant before the people. As soon as those bearing the Ark had come as far as the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the Ark were dipped in the brink of the waters coming down from above stood and rose up in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan, and those flowing down toward the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, were completely cut off. The people passed over opposite Jericho, and the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firmly on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel was passing over on dry ground until all the nation finished passing over the Jordan. Okay, there's a lot there, a lot that we kind of want to talk about, some things that we can see. The first thing is what we've already kind of noticed: Israel moves when God moves. Right? Israel does not go till God does. When the ark is moved, that's when they know. Before, as they're traveling in the wilderness, it's the pillar of the cloud, pillar of fire. When that moves, that's when they move. They're not independent. They're going to follow him in. This procession, I'm not really sure how we picture all this, but the waters are cut way above. Of course, they run out down this way because the Jordan is a river. And then you have people who are seem to be passing around the ark. And again, if we're maintaining that distance, we've got, half a mile between them and the ark as they cross. One of the things that I looked at this week kind of leading up to this is this kind of resembles a procession for a king who's coming into the land, that he travels and his guard travels around him. It's not really the same with Israel because they're not really God's guard. It's kind of the other way around. But this is one of those things where they are coming into the land and the king is approaching. Again, if we're listening, we're hearing the echoes, right? We're hearing echoes back. Obviously, with Jordan and the Red Sea, I mean, these are easy to see. Easy to see some parallels. One of the ones that I thought was interesting is that that Joshua tells the priests, when you come to the Jordan, actually I believe it's God that says this, when they come to the Jordan, they are to stand still. And that may not seem like much to us, but again, I hear these things that go back. You go back to Exodus chapter 14. Exodus chapter 14, and Israel is faced with the Red Sea and Pharaoh's army coming, and they say, okay, this is it. We're done, right? You brought us out here. We're all going to die. And Moses tells them, what? Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. And we see it here again. Stand still and see what God does. And the other section of 14 that really doesn't relate to this so much, but it's just one that I really love, is that the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Right? And this is what he tells them. And the water is cut off. Joshua, again, is elevated as the leader. If we've caught that, it's been several times through, from the end of Deuteronomy till now, where Joshua's going to be pointed at. God says, I'm going to exalt you as the leader. And this just keeps getting put out there so that Israel knows who it is that goes before them and mediates for them the way that Moses did. The crossing of the sea, the crossing of the Jordan, and we have the command early on, we don't really know why yet, but we're going to find out in chapter 4, to select 12 people, right? One from each tribe. Select a man from each tribe, and then we cross. We're just kind of left there of going, what are these guys for? So we're going to find that out as we move into chapter 4. But we see Israel again. We see this, right? We talked about this last week, kind of the mirror image of what happens with Moses and Israel, what happens with Joshua and Israel. And we're going to see these things are going to happen and the way they lay out. And we'll talk about that some more in just a second. So let's go to chapter 4. When all the nation had finished passing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, take 12 men from the people, from each tribe a man, and command them, saying, take 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the very place where the priest's feet stood firmly. Bring them over with you and lay them down in the place where you will lodge tonight. Joshua called 12 men from the people of Israel, whom he had appointed, a man from each tribe. Joshua said to them, pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and take up each of you a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of tribes of the people of Israel, that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in time to come, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever. Okay. We see this in the first seven verses. We see this repeated again at the end of Joshua chapter 4. And you kind of wonder why. Or I do. I wonder why it is. You've been commanded to take the stones. You're going to carry them with you. You're going to set those up. They're going to be a memorial. And then when you get down to chapter 19 and following, we do the same thing again. We talk about it again. This leads to speculation of, well, this is compiled of two different sources, and people have put this together, later on to form the book that we now have. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. It seems to me like we see the command here and we see the completion here, right? It's another one of those things, hopefully, that Israel sees as they come through of going, okay, here's what God told us to do, and here's what we did, right? And we talked about this last week. Whenever we do what it is that God's asked us to do, this is how things go with us. When we refuse, this is how it doesn't, right? So that we need to kind of think through there. So we have the stones, the command, and it's the memorial. This is going to be important. I don't know if you get tired of hearing this or not, but God is one who wants them to remember, right? And not just for this generation to remember, but for the next generation behind them. That these stones will be set up, and they're going to be set up at Gilgal. That's where they're going to camp for the night. That whenever your children in the future encounter this formation of stones, and they go, why? Because the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan so that we could cross. We're here in Canaan because of what God has done. Right? This constant reminder, because we know from moving on through Israel's history, but we don't even have to look at Israel's history. We can think of our own. Right? Of the number of times that we've forgotten who we are, or where we came from, or why we're here. Right? They're going, hey, yeah, we are God's people. God has saved us. And then we turn around and we do something that does not necessarily reflect the fact that we remember that. Okay? So this is one of those things that for Israel to remember and for them to pass on their faith. This is one of those things that seems to be important to God. That not only do we hold that faith, that we have that on our own, but that we pass that on to the generation that comes behind us. Right? In chapter 5, we're going to get to the Passover. The Passover is one of those places where God says this is to be used to tell your children about who I am and about what's been done. When they ask, why do we do this? It's because the Lord your God delivered you out of Egypt, right? This constant reminder, because we, in just a few chapters, right? Relatively few chapters away, we're going to come to Judges, where it says that there came a generation behind Joshua and behind that generation that didn't remember. And then we'll watch what happens in Judges, right? It's really important. I don't mean to beat on this too much, but I think that is one of the big things. I hope it's one of the big things that we take a look at every single week in communion. Is a reminder, right? And when your kids ask you, why is it? Right? Why is it you have that little plastic cup? Before then, why is it that you're breaking off this little piece and it's going around and everybody's quiet? Because the Lord your God, right? The Lord our God brought us out of slavery. And this was the cost of it. Right? It's a teachable moment. And I'll tell you, one I failed at for a long, long time, because the big priority was to make sure the kids shut up. Right? This is communion, shut up. And we'll tell you later, but then we forget, right? But it is one of those things, it's a communal thing. So anyway, God wants them to remember. let's keep going. The people did just as Joshua commanded, took up 12 stones out of the midst of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, just as the Lord told Joshua. They carried them over with them to the place where they lodged and laid them down there. Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priest bearing the ark of the covenant had stood. They are there to this day. For the priest bearing the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord commanded Joshua to tell the people, according to all that Moses commanded Joshua. Right? The people passed over in haste. When all the people had finished passing over, the ark of the Lord and the priest passed over before the people. The sons of Reuben, the sons of Gad, half-tribe of Manasseh passed over armed before the people of Israel, as Moses had told them. About 40,000, ready for war, passed over before the Lord for battle to the plains of Jericho. On that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel. They stood in awe of him just as they had stood in awe of Moses all the days of his life. So they take the stones. And there's one more step. Joshua takes 12 stones and sets them up in the Jordan. Verse 9 just is one of those things of going, it doesn't really give us a time frame, but it does I hope tells us a little bit about the book and why it's there. Right? It's apparently written at a time where it says, and those stones are there to this day. And they may still be there. Right? I don't know that. But this is to let those people know of going, you could go back and find them. That this actually happened. That we're not just making this up. Right? This is going to be another one for the later generations. We've already talked about 19 and following. The peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, and that you fear the Lord your God forever. That hand of the Lord is another one of those phrases that just keeps getting repeated, right? From Exodus forward. That God brought you out of Egypt with a mighty hand, an outstretched arm. He is with you, right? All right. Now, let's get to the fun stuff in chapter 5. As soon as the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan to the west, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea, heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan for the people of Israel until they had crossed over, their hearts melted, and there was no longer any spirit left in them because of the people of Israel. That very first thing, that very first verse, I hope takes us back a little bit, just a couple of chapters back to Rahab. Right? Rahab said, we've heard what God did when he dried up the Red Sea. Now the kings that are close say he dried up the Jordan at flood time, right? During his flood stage, so that they could cross. So they're wary of what's getting ready to happen. And so, right, if you think if I'm putting this together, I'm going and they march right on into Jericho and they begin to take over. But we don't. We have to stop. We have to stop. That time the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the sons of Israel a second time. That doesn't mean that each of the Israelites had already been circumcised and now they're doing it again. Right? Because if you go just a little bit further, it explains that the generation that came out of Egypt had been circumcised, but they had died. This is a new generation, and they hadn't been. So they're going to be before they move forward. Again, we may hear it, we may not. There's this interesting little part in Exodus. It's probably around Exodus 4 or 5. It's when Moses goes back. That Moses is on his way back to Egypt, and God meets him along the way. And it says that the Lord was going to destroy him because of circumcision. Moses needed to circumcise his sons before they went back, and so they had to stop and do that, right? And this is kind of an important thing. It must be, because God's dried up the river for them to come in, and now all of a sudden we've got to stop. We're stopping the entire army for this purpose. It is an important thing. Circumcision is a sign that you are the covenant people of God. We go all the way back to Abraham. I can't remember exactly where it is. It's in Genesis. I think it's around chapter 17. I may be wrong. Where God tells Abraham about and gives him the sign of circumcision, that you are the covenant people. This is how you're known, right? This is going to be a sign. You are God's covenant people. So we're going to stop and do this. And so we stop. We make these knives. We circumcise all the males of Israel. And once we recover, we move on. Okay? When the circumcising of the whole nation was finished, they remained in their places in the camp until they were healed. The Lord said to Joshua, "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." So the name of that place is called Gilgal to this day. While the people of Israel were encamped at Gilgal, they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month in the evening on the plains of Jericho. And the day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate of the produce of the land, unleavened cakes and parched grain, and the manna ceased the day after they ate the produce of the land, and there was no longer manna for the people of Israel, but they ate of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. Okay. Again, we've hit this already. We're going to hit it again. In case coming through the Jordan wasn't enough, you need to go all the way back and remember how you got here. And we're going to celebrate the Passover. The Passover can only be celebrated, by the way, which I'm convinced is why we have these things in this order. The Passover is celebrated by the people who are covenant people of God, who are circumcised. If you go back where he lays out the regulations for the Passover, that the foreigner can participate in it, the sojourner can participate in it, as long as all their males are circumcised. Right? This is a thing for the covenant people. And so we're going to celebrate the Passover. Again, that's stopping to remember before we move forward that this is how we got here. And then we ate from the produce of the land the next day. And the manna stops. That God had provided for them all the way up into Canaan, just like he said he would. God fed them. God led them. He gave them water. And as soon as he brought them into the land where he promised to give them and the things that they would have, that promise is complete. The manna stops. Right? Which should be a big day for Israel, because if we remember back in Numbers, they got mad because all they had to eat was the manna. Right? The only thing we've got is this bread from heaven. What are we going to do with that? Can't we have something else? Right? And you did. They made it. Okay. Here we go. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in hand. And Joshua went to him, and he said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And he said, "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." Joshua fell on his face to the earth, worshipped, and said to him, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Okay, I have a question. I mean, I know that we all see this, right? We see the burning bush. I hope we hear the burning bush. When Moses approaches the burning bush and God says, take off your sandals because the ground on where you're standing is holy ground, it seems to be, as we see that God is preparing to deliver a message to Moses. And he does, right? From the burning bush, it's here's what you're going to do. Moses tries every way in the world to get out of it, right? I don't talk so good, right? Surely there's somebody else. Just send somebody else, please. God won't let him out, but he's going to give him a message. The commander of the Lord's army shows up and says, "Now I am here. Take off your sandals, because the place where you stand is holy ground." And what message does he give Joshua? Nothing. We have nothing. And that seems odd to me. I don't know if I can tell you why, but I just know that he goes, okay, this looks like we're ready. What is he going to tell him? And he doesn't. We don't have anything. The next thing we do in chapter 6 is going to be move on into Jericho. But I think this was one of those places where it kind of helps us with the kind of bookends those sections from Exodus 3 to now. Right? It begins, Israel's journey out of Egypt begins with God appearing at a burning bush, telling Moses, this is who I am, and this is what you're going to do. And when they come into Canaan, that episode of coming into Canaan ends with God showing up and saying, here I am. Right? I also find it interesting that Joshua asked the question, are you one of us or not? Right? Are you for us or are you for the enemy? And the answer is no. Don't you love that when somebody asks you an either or you ask somebody an or question? I do this to Stacy all the time. It aggravates the crap out of her. Right? She'll ask me something about or, and I'll go, yes. Right? And you go, what, you got to pick one. No, he says. I'm not sure what that tells us, but I have an idea. That it's not a matter of for or against either Israel or the Canaanites. This is the commander of the Lord's army. Right? He is for, it appears to be, whoever is on the side of God. Israel's not going to go in with a blank check. Okay? They're not going to go in and go, okay, well, God's with us. What can possibly happen? Right? We'll do what we want because God is with us. No. He's going to be whoever's on God's side. Right? That's going to be the side that the commander of the army of the Lord shows up. Right? That's where he's going to be. I'm bad at doing math in my head. But centuries, how about that? Centuries later, God tells the prophet by the name of Jeremiah to go stand in the temple. I want you to go stand in the temple, and I want you to tell the people this. One of the things he has them tell them is just because you say, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, that God is here in this place, that we can do whatever we want. That you can't come to this temple, right? God said, I want you to tell them, you can't come to this temple, pretend to worship me, and then go do your own thing. And God will eventually leave that temple and Jerusalem destroyed. I think we see kind of the front end of that. You're going, no, I'm not necessarily for you just because you're the circumcised people of God. I'm not necessarily for your enemies or against your enemies. I'm the commander of the Lord's army. That's where I get my orders. Okay? God shows up here. I just think it's fascinating because I think it ends that section. Right? It kind of ends that whole section of how we mirror Moses and Joshua. With the Passover, with the manna, with the Red Sea, with all of those things. And we can kind of line those up and see those turn and go the other direction and end here where you go, you're here. Right? Now, it also could be that the message is not going to be a one-off. Right? With Moses, it was, this is what I want you to do. It could be that the commander of the Lord's army here is going, you'll have your orders as we move forward. And we'll see that when we come in to Jericho. All right. That's it for this morning. Next week, I think, what have we got? Next week, 6 through 8 with the fall of Jericho, and then moving into to Achan and his issues. And then the town of Ai, and then the renewal of the covenant that was talked about at the end of Deuteronomy. Again, thanks so much for hanging in there. I know that sometimes it may get tedious with some of this, but I think there's some really good stuff that we can learn as we look at the way God interacts with these people there. Let's have a prayer to close. Father, we thank you. We thank you for the ability that we have to gather, to examine the word that you've left for us, to take a look at the way that you have interacted with your people since the beginning. Father, as we look at these texts and we see what you ask of us, that you ask of us to be your people, faithful to the covenant promises that you've made, remembering who you are and how we got here. Father, we fail a lot of times with that. A lot of times we forget. We forget that you are the reason. That you're the reason that we're here. That you're the reason that we can have the relationship with you that we have. Help us to repent when that happens and to run back to you. Father, what we want to do is to be on your side. We want to be on your side continually. Help us to let go of the things we need to let go of, to honor you in all that we do. We love you so much. In Jesus' name, amen.